about so that we can get a better sense of how things go on related to some of the discussion topics here at the conference at our different schools. So what I think I'm going to do, since this is a fairly unorthodox event for the conference, is actually start with introductions, especially since we have a fairly small room. So I'd like to go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves, say who you are, if you're a current student, what institution you're attending, what program you're in, if you're done with school, what program you graduated from and when you graduated. So we'll just start with you. No, you don't have to. No.
I'm second semester graduate student in business.
Okay. Behind you.
I'm Ying Fan. I'm also a graduate student from business here.
Okay.
Second semester.
I'm Adrian. I'm from Dominican University's Graduate School of Social Work.
I'm Dan Moore, first semester grad student in business.
Okay.
I'm Tom McMahon. I graduated in 2010, and I'm also studying at Northwestern for another master's degree.
And what are you studying at Northwestern?
It's a global studies program. It's kind of an interdisciplinary humanities program, gravitating more towards the sociology side.
And what did you graduate in Dominican?
Yeah, I studied academic libraries.
Okay. Okay. How about back in the room?
I'm Carolyn Burrell. I'm a graduate student at UCSLS as well. I'll be graduating this coming fall.
Okay.
I'm Suzanne Salisbury. I go to Drexel University.
You said Drexel?
Yeah, I'm graduating in June. I also work at Northwestern Law Library.
Okay.
I'm Penny.
Okay.
I'm Greer Martin. I'm a second semester student at GISLIS.
And oh wait, no, I think that's everything. So it looks like we have 6 GISLIS students. Well, actually 8, including myself and Abby. We have two Dominican people, one Northwestern, one from Drexel, and one student from Peking University, Kong Sal, there in the back. So what I'm going to ask is actually that I'm going to recruit some of you to come up and be my co-panelists. So I think since there's only one of you from Drexel, I'm going to invite you to come on up. And similarly, we have one current Northwestern student, so if you'd like to come on up. Can I get a volunteer from the GISLIS crew who would like to come up and speak about GISLIS? There's no qualifications, so don't feel like you have to be a titled individual to come up.
How about the person sitting near the front?
I want the person that just walked in.
Oh.
Do you want to be a panelist?
No. We want to privilege. Go ahead. Your voice.
No, we had one. No, I guess we don't have any current Dominican students, right?
I graduated.
You're a graduate from Dominican, but how about Adrian? You're not a student, but maybe you could come up and represent Dominican.
I'm not a library information science, but I do that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, like, we're not just about library information science on this channel. And then finally, Kong, would you be willing to come up as well?
I can tell.
Oh, okay. No problem.
So now we have our esteemed panel here to join us today. And I apologize that their bios are not in the program at such short notice. But hopefully they'll have some enlightening things to say. So I'm going to serve more as a moderator, pose some questions to get you all thinking. But let me just ask. I wanted to start, and you'll have to probably say your names a few times before I get it down. But the person who graduated from Dominican's Library School and is now studying at Northwestern. What was your name again?
Tom McMahon. I also work at Northwestern University.
Oh, you work at Northwestern in the library?
Familiar? Sorry.
You work in the library?
Yeah, no, the main library.
Okay.
That's a campus, yeah.
Okay. So let me start with you. What are some of the things that from your graduate program you feel have been most useful in your professional position?
What I like is the emphasis on, and one of the reasons why I like coming to eChicago is the emphasis on pragmatic application and values-based librarianship. So getting outside of your institution, and in academic libraries, it's easy to be very focused on the ivory tower aspect of things and just delivering services to your patrons. But I like to think that Dominican gave me a base of values where I'm looking to apply these things to a broad range of categories outside of my 9 to 5, I guess you would say.
So in thinking about anything beyond your 9 to 5, do you find yourself applying any of your library values outside of your professional position?
Yeah, I've served as a volunteer on a number of projects. I've done one focused on creating lit reviews for a grant-funded project that ended a couple of years back, revolving around studying trends in employment discrimination against people with disabilities and some of the geographic. I know somebody who is involved in the data mining aspect of it, so they get a government database that tracks EEOC employees' activity, but they don't focus on what the trends are. They don't pull, I should say the EEOC doesn't pull data for purposes more than the HR. So this grant was to study the actual trends that were being reported to the EEOC, and they just do data mining. So they didn't have any real lit reviews, and they were having trouble plugging into some of the greater literature. So I volunteered my services, and they kind of gave me that project, and I was able to apply that. I work on a project documenting local Chicago Jewish history. Another friend of mine is an active person in the Chicago Jewish community, so we're looking at the history of notable, they would have been notable then, but maybe kind of have been eclipsed in more recent studies of Jewish people and institutions from the city's founding through World War I. And just we're in the process of collating all the data and trying to put it in a presentable, digestible form online and print.
And what was the first organization you said you volunteered with?
It was a group called the National EEOC ADA Research Project. That's out of abbreviation. And that was at the Virginia Commonwealth University.
And so you're volunteering on that project from here in Chicago? So
yeah, I know the project director is a friend of mine, and that again, the project was ended, so it was grant funded and kind of went through the cycle.
So let me, before I kind of turn the spotlight on someone else, let me ask you a question. So in these projects that you're working on outside of your 9 to 5, where you're using the values that you acquired in your graduate education, how did you find out about these opportunities of where you could become of use beyond your professional position?
I saw a talk a couple of years ago by a woman named Camilla Leary, who was the ALA president at the time, American Library Association president, for anybody that's not a library person. And she had this theory of what was called frontline advocacy. So it's just in your everyday life and your contacts outside of the library world, people you might know from the neighborhood or growing up or however you might come in touch with them, trying to put forth the skills and the values of the profession and seeing where there might be an opportunity for interaction. So I've had just, mostly by chance, mostly by friends, family, people kind of word of mouth, talking to each other, meeting people at a cocktail party just by chance. It just kind of fell together for me. But I found that it's been useful, especially not only just having those values, but be able to articulate those values and try to look. It's kind of like a reference interview where you're trying to see somebody's needs, even though you're not at a reference to us.
So you see the needs outside of your job, but you still feel compelled to try to meet those needs as a responsible individual.
Absolutely.
So that's great. So I will hope to hear some more from you in a minute, but I just wanted to go through and ask some questions. The woman from Drexel, I'm sorry, could you? Suzanne. Okay. I guess the first question I wanted to ask you, so Drexel is on the East Coast. Is it New York City?
It's in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. So what? How did you hear about eChicago, and how does this compare to experiences back in Philly?
So I actually live in Chicago.
Okay.
It's a distance program.
Okay.
I'm from the East Coast, so that's why I started my journey there. I think Chicago is actually the first event I've been to, but this is pretty great. The other things that I've kind of come across as well, like webinars, or I've been to a couple other events in Chicago, which have been really great. I'm also on a bunch of listservs. Any and all listservs that have to do with libraries, get on them because they really great stuff. That's actually how I found out about this and how I signed up, so that was really great. I think that's maybe the best part of my program is that they're really have a very, very strong kind of outreach. Like this woman that sent me the eChicago thing, she knows that I live in Chicago, and so she said, oh, this is going to be there, you should definitely attend. So they're really organized about sending kind of like site-specific information to each student, which is really great. I think that was via my advisor listing it. So that's been something that's really helpful. Also working in a library, which is very nice, although I have no background in the law whatsoever. Working at the Federal Restaurant's been great. They have a huge library system, so everyone's pretty
So what listservs are you on that you find especially useful that people may not know about or may want to know about?
Yeah, I'm not prepared to tell you which ones. I guess, like the ALA has a bunch that you can sign up for. I'm also part of the Art Libraries of North America listserv. Also the VRA, Visual Resources Association. So basically, if you just, I think what I ended up doing was just going to, I promote like library associations, and we come up and there are a lot of RSS feeds that you can get, especially in your schools. I'm sure that there are lots of lists. Also, Drexel has a really great employment free time of the year. You like a login or anything website that they have taken every day jobs, and that's like across the country. It's not necessarily just on the East Coast by any means. I found a lot of really great postings there, similar to the AWA and stuff, but a little broader. It's not just library additional jobs.
So both Tom and Suzanne, you're both preparing or are employed at academic libraries, if that's where you see yourself heading?
Yeah, my background, I worked at the Newberry and our institute libraries also, so I'm kind of interwoven with academic libraries, although that's where I want to be, so
Yeah, I spent all my time in academic libraries since I've started working in libraries. I did an internship at Loyola's Info Commons that opened up a couple years ago, and then I've been at Northwestern for about 3 years, and that's where I relate to definitely stay in academic internship.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I guess, let's see. So maybe now would be a good time just as maybe to try to pull out some contrast. I believe you're aiming for public librarianship, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe based on what you've heard, you notice any differences in how you're kind of preparing yourself for the job market?
Well, I have to stay at the U of I until I finish my graduate program because that's the only way I'm able to afford to go there. So I currently work at the U of I. And I'm really interested in community informatics. So, and I'm planning on staying in the Champaign Urbana community. So I guess I see myself either working for some kind of nonprofit agency or the two public libraries that are available to me, unless I work at the outer lying areas and rural and northern area.
So how do we, some people in the room maybe have more familiarity with this term community informatics than others. Would you say a little bit about how you think community informatics is relevant for the training of public librarians?
The social service aspect of what I'm learning has been really fascinating to me. I didn't really understand why I was so drawn to my idea of librarianship, but now I understand more about it because of it feels like partial social work to me, and I really experienced a lot of that when I did my hands-on. We were supposed to be cyber navigators last semester, and it all kind of started to make sense because it feels like kind of mission work. It feels like a calling. I don't know if that answered your question.
No,
Sorry,
definitely.
I'm really nervous.
No, I think that's great. So you were a cyber navigator at the Urbana Public Library?
Right.
And so could you just say a little bit about, for people who may not be familiar with that term, what that entailed?
Yeah, they have public computers, and anyone can have access to them. You don't have to have a library card, and people come in and with varying needs and levels of expertise, and some people don't even know how to use a mouse. So they basically just access the volunteer Urbana Free Library also has a circuit breaker program, which I volunteered for one time. And that helps people access services, for assistance with their power bills. And, I know there are a lot of homeless people that come in and use the services to check their email, and I don't know, just it was really eye-opening.
And that project you were doing when you were a cyber navigator at the Urbana Free Library, you were also collecting research data. Is that correct? Were you taking, annotating information about what's coming?
Yeah, they have a checklist about what kinds of questions that are being asked of you, and people are printing things, and if they're checking their email, or it just kind of felt like how are you being utilized, and how are you keeping track of your time here?
So from that data that you collected, was there any interesting findings that you may not have expected?
I guess maybe I was a little bit judgmental at first about the kinds of things that people are coming in to do, which is really bad. And I kind of had a paradigm shift towards the end of the semester, like, why do I care if all someone is coming in to do is check their Facebook page or learn how to play a better game of Farmville or whatever, why do I care? I'm helping someone bridge their own digital divide, whatever that may be, so taking the value judgment out of it, it was a little bit of an eye-opener for me. Why do I care if someone's bringing a CD, or I'm helping them acquire a level of computer skills that they didn't have before. I don't know that.
No, definitely. No, I think that was perfect. And that discussion of paradigm shift and how the experience of doing something will also participating in a research project. I think that's a quite powerful thing that you said. So, and I appreciate your honesty.
I guess I went in there feeling like I was going to be a world changer and helping someone really develop a broad level of skills, but really all they needed to do was learn how to play a better game of Farmville. That's awesome, because that was what they needed from me. So.
Great. I think now I'm going to shift over to Adrian, who's a professor of social work at Dominican, and I think it's a good follow-up from Holly, because some of your research is a little bit related. Adrian, could you just say a little bit about some of the research projects that you've worked on?
Well, I've worked on the project with PrairieNet from many years ago for my PhD work, and I'm currently looking at the digital divide within social work profession. And like librarians and social workers, we have this mandate to meet the needs of the people and to address people's needs, and to issues of social justice. Those are very crucial to our profession. So it's all our similarities. So the other projects I'm working with is to look at the digital divide among social work students as well. There's really, social work students are really not in the scheme of things in terms of understanding how to use information literacy tools. So I'm also currently involved with Kate Williams in her Global Literature Review project as well. Yeah, so I think one of the issues that we need to ask ourselves in terms of our education is, what skills has our program taught us or given to us so that we are able to use it for the future, you see. And as I reflect in terms of my experiences, I can see, I think, networking opportunities, very practical things like theories, knowledge, it really doesn't matter now, but networking relationships, realizing, the calling for greater need, that what you do really made a difference to the people that you work with or to the groups that you work with. I think, so those are my thoughts. And I think it's always good to think about, what kind of practical skills are we going to bring to our next job, I think. What kind of passion do you want to sort of bring to, so that you can sort of be a lifelong learner? Yeah.
Great. Let me go back. Could you say a little bit about the Community Informatics Literature Review project you're working on?
Yeah, because the field of community informatics is still infancy. So what, Abdul, correct me if I'm wrong, Kate Williams is trying to get a sense of the field of computer informatics across in various countries. And what we've done is we've looked at the top 3 journals in specific fields. I'm doing social work. Kang is doing, what were you doing? Library information, and so different fields that we look at the state of knowledge of community informatics in that field. I was telling Kate, we looked at whether the project was implemented in different regions across the world, what region, and was it by nonprofits, education institution, and so on. I was thinking in terms of going forward, we can look at in terms of the research designs, those kinds of things that will generate knowledge, long-lasting knowledge.
Yeah.
But we can actually see that the field of computer informatics is very new, and definitely if you want to go into it, and I think there's a lot of potential, not only for librarians to go into it, but for social workers and other people from different disciplines.
Yeah, I'm just going to take a step back. We've mentioned the term community informatics a few times, and I just want to make sure for anyone in the audience who may not have heard of that term before, just so we have a clear definition. So community informatics is the study of how local historical communities are using digital technology and obstacles to using technology, with a specific focus on how the use of digital technologies in local historical communities can contribute to what we call cyber power or powerful communities. So that's so we use this framework, and I also work with Adrienne on this project. So we use this framework to look at the literature in many different disciplines to see how this topic is being discussed. And I think also the conversations we're having here today also contribute to that conversation in a less formal way. So we need to have both the formal published literature, and we also need to have conversations like this one where people can come together and discuss this topic. So maybe on that note, I'd like to ask Kang Zhao, who's our guest from Peking University, a PhD student who's been working on this project as well as a number of other projects. And Kang, you've heard from some of our guests here. Do you have any reflections on how some of the topics being discussed from your perspective from a Chinese university?
Okay. In Chinese, there's still some discussions about the translation of the term community informatics. The term we always use that has most closest relationship with community informatics is informationalization. That's a term usually used by the Chinese scholars and in the Chinese government reports. When we do research that is very related with community informatics, people are always focused on the how to investment in the public infrastructure to support the people in the city to use the computers, and also the researchers focus more and more on the information needs of normal people, and they focus more on to establish the better infrastructure in rural area. And I think the difference between China and U.S., one of the things is we don't have the job positions like self-navigator in Chinese, and one of the problem we met is that how to make the project like the computer lab or also sustainable, because there's lots of funding coming from the government to support a project that can help people learn how to use computers. But like one computer, we have good computers to establish a lab, but there's no people, there's no stable staff who can support them to use computers. Even people, they have a place to go to use computers. They don't know what they can do with computers. And in some of the research, we saw the local workers, they only go to the like the place like night bar, they all use computers for entertainment. They don't know how to use it for purpose of education or how to improve their life through computer. How to use the computer to make themselves have cyber power to improve themselves. So that's a problem that we try.
And let me ask you, you've also, if I'm correct, you've participated on a research project that looked at how academic libraries in China were serving the surrounding communities. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Okay, I did a research about academic library, especially Peking University Library, and we found and the findings of our research. One of the importance is that the academic library always have good computers and internet connections, especially in top universities. They got lots of funding from the government, but the existing phenomenon is that there's lots of good computers in the Peking University Library, but as most students have their own laptop or computers at their home or at their dormitory, they don't always use the computer in the library. There's lots of computers that are vacant for people use, but the policy for the local community to use the computer in the academic library is very restricted. You need to pay very high fees to even get into the library. I see here you can get into any library into the university without need to pay any fees. But in China, you need to pay a fees to get entrance to the library. And even you want to use the internet or the resources from the computers in the library, you need to pay extra fees, and that fees is very high. So if like a temporary worker on the campus, they don't have the even right as the office staff and faculty and students to use the libraries. But they have very low incomes, so they don't even can have the opportunity to get into the library to use the computers. So that's a phenomenon of digital divide.
Yeah, I thought that was a really, really interesting research, so thank you for sharing that. Our two academic librarians, do you have any commentary on this? Do you notice any people from the public coming in to use the academic library, or what the policy may be at Northwestern?
We actually recently just had a change in policy, but a change in implementation of that policy. So at the main library, the law library is a bit more different than I think the medical library as well as its own policies. But the main library, there's a satellite library on the north part of campus, primarily focused on engineering. There's another extension of the main library on the downtown campus. Those are generally open to the public from Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 5, and then Saturday until noon. We just started the main library. We have a registration system, so it's still free of charge, and we are a federal depository library, so especially people wanting to use those collections in our government documents library, we have a separate transportation library that also is pretty GovDoc heavy. Anybody wanting to use those can come in anytime, but other than that, it's that 8:30 to 5 rule, and now people have to register. And we still see people coming in, so it really hasn't been a barrier to access that one could construe it to be. It's just another step in the process. There were some concerns about safety on campus and everything like that brought up by the Associated Student Government. So we did that and implemented it. It's been pretty successful. It's pretty painless, and we're still open to the public. We're still doing a pretty steady stream of regular patrons from the general public.
Good. That's good to know. I have a lot of questions I'd like to ask you, but first, what I'd like to see is, do any of you have any questions you'd like to ask one another, and then we'll turn it over and see if there's any audience questions. But first, do any of you want to ask one of the other panelists a question about what you've heard? Okay. Is there any? Oh, here we go.
All of us as individuals, have a point of view. We have different ideas about our own careers, our own experiences, and yet there's another sort of level of all of us, and I use the word generation. Now, Frantz Fanon said, each generation must discover its mission and fulfill it or betray it. I like that because I'm from the 60s generation, and we sort of had a mission, and we sort of tried to do it. And so I'm wondering, for all of you, if we were to envision and be creative, to say, for all students in library and information science today, what is our collective mission that all of our individual things feed into? I mean, this is the moment of high-speed internet. This is the moment where the digital divide is going to become really important because hospitals, everything is transforming, and if the digital divide exists, it will have a direct impact on health, education, and so on. On the other hand, the library is under attack, and the librarian this morning talked about the 1930s, and those people obviously had a mission, and they carried it out. That's our whole point about you can't stop a job at 5. If you have a mission, it becomes a calling, and not just a job, as they say. So I'm wondering if we were to all put our brains together in terms of collective intelligence, what would our general mission be that comes out of all of the individual interests?
Let me see. Any responses to that? Reflections?
I would return again to the theme of frontline advocacy, and as you say, don't punch out at 5 o'clock. This is kind of a vocation. So we do have to take this around with us the rest of the day, and even though we're not again 9 o'clock, we can try to find applications in everyday life and make connections, Professor Adrian was saying, and build bridges. And one of the things I think is an impediment to access is the stereotype of a librarian as kind of a quiet, reserved person who is not very engaging. I think it's important to shatter that stereotype and try to rebrand the library experience as kind of personal and dynamic, and become, whenever you're working in partnership with somebody inside the library or out, becoming that person's advocate and navigating a really confusing deluge of information. And I think that's where the future of the profession lies, regardless of what, if you want an academic or public or school libraries or anything else related.
I mean, I think that's quite nice the way that you put that. Thinking about needing to rebrand the library as personal and dynamic. That might not be a mission for an entire generation, but I think at least for our generation interested in libraries and library science, that seems like at least part of a generational calling that we should think about how we would respond to that.
What?
No, that I was finished.
I've been feverishly taking notes today about some things that and I liked the first speaker this morning that said that libraries are radically subversive institutions. That really struck me, and I think to answer Arnold's question, I think cyber democracy is kind of my mission in what I'm the most interested in. I think definitions of literacy, are changing. And I used to work in career counseling and in human resources before and this is like a second career for me, and developing people to their potential, and a new definition of literacy to include, cyber power is kind of my mission.
Well, let me kind of I think that's great, but let me try to challenge us all a little bit and pose kind of a difficult question that something I struggle with. But we talked, Kong and Holly, you both kind of talked about this entertainment versus education, and you said you had this paradigm shift where you kind of needed to step back and stop being judgmental about the way that people are using technology. But there is this kind of constant corporate pressure on technology. We we know that the corporations, any way that they can make profit out of technology, they will make profit. So maybe have you ever thought, or have any of you, any in the room ever thought about how the library can operate in this milieu of corporate technology?
I went to one of the sessions, and I'm sorry, the one right before lunch. The three panelists actually used the word customer and patron, like
Interchangeably.
interchangeably,
Yeah.
and I mean that's commodifying library services, and the library is supposed to be the cornerstone of the community, and we're equating our patrons as customers. That's confusing to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, the language that we use, I hope, let's see, I could say, but let's, Paul, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a big passion for me. Exactly the question that you posed, what do we do about the corporatization of everything, really? I mean, are we going to have, is the Champaign Public Library, in 10 years going to be called the Pepsi Public Library? I don't know. I think that remains to be seen. But I think, and just going along with what Holly said, at the beginning of this country, there was a fight for democracy, and at that time, it was a fight to get away from the powers of England that were, overshadowing the colonies. And I think today, what's the fight about? There's a fight against the corporatization of America. And I think libraries play a tremendous role in that. And the internet obviously has played a huge role in that, but now we're seeing that being corporatized. And so I think, one of my missions is to be a part of that, open source, and I mean that in a broad sense, that open source movement that is there to provide an alternative. Because, like was mentioned in the last session, Google can be great, but Google is a business and Google is a filter. And it's filtering the way that you see the world. And it's filtering the way everybody sees the world nowadays, because I think it has like 80% of the market share. So I think, we need to come up with the open source, the alternative solutions to that. I think that's a huge, and a way of empowering people through the ideals of democracy and bringing that through technology. And finally, just a kind of a practical note, how can we bring that to people? Some people are concerned, not everyone has access to a computer and this and that, but most people have access now to personal computers on their phone. And there's a lot of ideas that we can start going to, skip the personal computer, go straight to the phone. And I think there's a lot of cool ideas that can come out of that. And this monolithic battle for democracy to continue on versus corporatization.
I'm glad that Abdul has brought this question because it talks about the mission, you see, and who are we as professionals as we move forward to the world. And I think your mission is to reflect on your mission throughout your entire professional life, because technology is changing, your environments are constantly changing, and change is so rapid because of this technology, So your mission now may be very different from the mission of what fans the flame of your passion, professional passion, may be different later on, maybe 5 or 6 years down the line. So I think there's really a need to think about what you really stand for as a professional. What are you really interested in? How interested are you in making a difference in communities? And changing the world of librarians, and all those kinds of things need to be considered with the changing economy and global economy. So I think we need to see a lot of the bigger picture as we move forward.
Thank you.
Noah, can we ask everybody to speak? I
Yeah.
Everybody out here is thinking. There's some people who haven't spoken.
Sure. I don't know, do we want to just go around the room and hear what everyone has to say?
So I have a question about, we're talking about informatics, community informatics. I'm not familiar with this term, but anyway. Because I'm thinking that there are cultures and traditions they do not they're not participating in this kind of information society. For example, in America, Amish people.
Which people?
Amish people.
Okay.
So what do you think the communication between us and them? And do you see that this is kind of an equal situation in terms of cyber power?
I don't know, Holly, you mentioned you have some interest in rural areas. So maybe
Actually, part of my book on real estate in Copa, there are some Amish communities in Ohio, I think it was Ohio, that are actually utilizing library services and computers. I mean, I don't understand the differences in the different sets of being Amish, but
Maybe if you think globally, like some more rural areas, that's going to be a problem.
So the question is, how do you bridge the global digital divide, right? Locally and globally.
when you were talking about the fact that there aren't cyber navigators, there are not people doing that. Do you have any ideas on how that could be bridged in China?
I think one of the rules is for them we need to set the special positions in the community technology center. There should be some special staff who can help people to use computers and to let them know how to get information they needed from the computers and to let them know how they can get from the internet. And go back to the actual questions about the mission of the future library. I think one of the important missions for them is to let the library become an important institution for the lifelong learning, because people need to have they don't only need to have the computers and internet access, they also need to have the information literacy all their life to know what information they want and to know where they can get the information from the internet. So the role of the librarian in future is that they can help people, because we need those jobs like navigators to help people use computers, as the technology developed very fast and the role of librarians are changing. They can act as those navigators to help people to give trainings for them, to let them know how they can even get education from the computer if they don't have enough money to pay for the fee to get into the college or universities. They can even learn, because there are many open access resources of education, so they can learn from the computer. They can get those information from the internet. There must be someone who can provide training for them.
Yeah. So I think this point about lifelong learning, and I think maybe abstracting a little bit outside, framing that as a collective mission could be to change the way that we think about education. I mean, I grew up in a small rural community, and the consensus in my community was you get your high school degree, maybe you get a community college degree, and then your education is pretty much finished. And we know that that model is not going to work now and into the future. People who think their education is going to end at an arbitrary age are going to be left behind. So we know that changing the way our culture as a whole thinks about education and learning is going to be critical. That was a really great question, and hopefully we've talked a little bit about some of your issues. But let's keep going around the room. How about Philip? Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share?
I don't know, I'm just sort of absorbing this. One thing I've noticed is that discussion about Google as sort of a gatekeeper for information and their corporate aims misaligning with sort of the world's needs for free and universal access to accurate information. I am a technologist, and I know that they have their sponsored advertisements, but now increasingly Google has been promoting their own properties, their maps and places, things, and they have flight search now in there. And soon their strategy long term over the next 10 years is actually to try and deliver all information directly from Google.com and not send you anywhere else and put ads on it, have it on your phone and everything. I think that this is interesting because I do think that one of the things that technologists can do is try and build open, freer, replicable alternatives to services like Google. And right now, there's just so much money in the world of technology that that's not happening because people know that they can go work for Google or Facebook. But I think eventually this is going to happen. There have been some efforts. There's a project called Common Crawl, which is a nonprofit that was started about a year ago, which is aimed to provide a database of the crawling of the web, which is sort of the first step that you need. A while ago, Amazon offered a service that was similar, you had to pay for it. And so with an updated, freely usable, freely licensed crawl of the web, you could potentially build a search engine on top of that. What would be needed is for someone to front a good amount of money to get this started. I think that the European Union was interested in doing something at one point. But I do think it's important long term, especially since people sit down on their computers and where do they get permission to go to Google. Google is going to promote their own properties going forward. So that's just an interesting thing.
Okay, I think we're just going to try to keep going around, and then we'll come back to some of the comments so we make sure we hear from everyone. Paul, you've said a little bit, so is it all right if I go on? Could you say your name again and maybe any reflections you have? No, that's fine. I think as long as you speak up.
I consider my mission for my work is to gradually change the traditional mission of the library into kind of the information education center as concept, because and then we also introduce new technology to the public and reconstruct the technology, maybe find the new meaning of such technology, because I think 20 years ago we were not talking about the computer literacy, also the information literacy. But now, if you cannot use the computer, you will be kind of margined. So I have a technology background in computer science, and many times I talk to my classmates in former research lab in Hong Kong. I think we all believe that maybe 10 or 12 years later, everyone should learn how to do programming, because at first, as you know, that only the CS people we do programming, and then gradually, if you are studying the science or engineering, you should know how to do programming. And then now the students, I think in business school, many students they also should do some programming in VBA, in Excel. So I believe such skills will gradually become so everyone should learn it, and I think the library can carry such responsibility to teach the public how to use the new technology. And I also believe that because the library is more related to the ordinary people, we also have the advantage to discover the new form of the technology. We do not need to just follow the technology from A engineering school, so something like that global, so we can discover our technology. This is my consideration.
No, I think that's an actually a really captivating idea, this idea of libraries as ubiquitous schools for teaching programming. It's definitely, it's definitely a high bar to strive towards, but that's what we're looking for in part of this panel, so thank you. Let's just keep going around. How about you right there?
I agree with that. The example that the librarian gave earlier today about QuickBooks, selling QuickBooks and the computers, it was just, that's a great idea. I think, to me that's sort of a level of community informatics as well, and it made me think that there are levels to it, and one would be just basic dissemination of access to technology, and another would be where there already is access, just don't put a ceiling on it if you have the resources. Also, the discussion about the term of customers, I didn't personally have a problem with it. I think it, if anything, just kind of reveals the value of information that librarians provide, that there, in a way, is a value on it, and it, I think in some case, or in really all cases of librarianship, there is a kind of, I think of that as customer service as well. Although I understand the kind of shakiness around corporatization of that, but I think it's just sort of more points to the requirement of librarians to sort of think of their patrons as people who are, receiving a service.
Great, thank you. Roxana?
Hi, I think I'm missing some of the context here because I came in late.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm with the Partnership for Connected Illinois. We're the state broadband entity. I just came to this session because I minored in GISLIS when I was at U of I. I graduated in 2008, and I loved the material that I learned. I then went on to teach for America, and I've been in the U.S.-Mexican border for the past 3 years teaching special ed, and was starting to research grad school and became very, very interested in community informatics. So I'm happy to be here and learn. Dually, as part of my position as the communication specialist at PCI, I'm collecting broadband success stories throughout the state, and I'm trying to make people more aware of why broadband is important and what it can do for communities. So just trying to gather a repository of these stories.
Great, no, that's wonderful, and I think this is that helps us bring us a little bit back to one of our agenda items today. So, from your perspective, collecting these case studies, what are some types of things that you would recommend people who are working in libraries or other settings? What are the types of things that we need to be recording and documenting to make sure that what we do becomes widely known? So it's not just something that we do as individuals, so that it becomes more widely known. Because it sounds like that's what Partnership for Connected Illinois is trying to do. So what advice do you have about making what we do more known?
Yeah, that's something I'm struggling with too, and something that I'm trying to get a grasp on. So far, my background is also, I majored in journalism at U of I, so a lot of it is just human interest stories, like what appeals to people, what makes them realize that hey, this is important. I know I was at a K through 12 school in Southern Illinois last week, and they were just doing a lot of distance learning, and they had all of these different programs going on with their library, and just like getting that one individual who had been able to go to college because whatever the program offered, I mean, just any success story like that is, that people can relate to, is what I'm trying to convey, I guess.
Great. So that's wonderful, and I thank you for coming. I do want to make sure we hear from everyone, so Richard in the back, do you want to say a little bit?
Well, I guess what I'm kind of hearing a lot is this idea of how we provide information to our community members and our users, and I feel like a large part of that is there's something inherent about that we're still thinking of the users as consumers, So consumers of not goods for sale, but consumers of information. And I guess what I'm more interested in is moving beyond that, and how do we empower our community members and our users to actually produce information, and share information, and be the people who are actually out there and connecting with one another. I think librarians who are studying and preparing to be those people who are like the traditional reference role there's no future in that. I mean, we have to kind of face facts, and like people are adept at finding information that's good enough for them, and so I think we need to move beyond that and kind of figure out how do we create a community that is fully empowered to produce and share information of their own, and tell their own stories. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about.
So yeah, I mean that's a great point. So I think another mission that we may think of as defining a vocabulary, because it sounds like that's a big struggle when we've heard about users, consumers, patrons, citizens, customers. What is the vocabulary that we can get behind in terms of talking about what we're doing or what we want to do or where we'd like to go? So that's something I think we need to keep talking about. But let's keep going around.
Well, just like listening to everybody and from some of the talks that we heard this morning, one of the things that's been talked about is having some sort of a needs assessment. And instead of, I've been thinking about like information in libraries globally, especially in one of the courses I'm taking this semester, and the information needs, especially like talking about the digital divide and in areas that don't necessarily have libraries or don't have that kind of service, like how we can think about like those communities and having sort of a little bit of what Richard was talking about too, empowering them to create their own information and figuring out what they need as a community instead of like inserting like a Western model that might not necessarily work for that community. And so just thinking about like the needs assessment of a particular community and figuring out what they need and what kind of information is beneficial to them, and then helping them to create it, I think is sort of the idea that I'm going with here.
Great. Dan, do you have anything to add to that?
It's very similar to what Richard brought up. I studied art history, and I want to move back into art history after finishing my library science program. And one of the, art history is many things, but one of which is the preservation of memory. We talked about our values going into the future and preserving what we would call, folk culture or low culture, the things that aren't deposited in large library institutions by virtue of their cultural importance, the small local memories. So that's one of the things that I perceive to be the future values of librarianship by virtue of proliferating technology. We have these memory recorders now everywhere.
No, I mean, you certainly hit on a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So I'll just say one project that I've been following is Carl Lindahl at the University of Houston did a project where they got a small funding from the Library of Congress, and they actually trained refugees from Katrina who were living in Houston. Lindahl started as just a citizen, just volunteering to help with the refugee situation at the Houston Astrodome. And from his experience as a citizen, just volunteering, he used his training as a folklorist to train people in using digital technologies to record other refugee stories. So it was refugees recording the stories of other refugees and building a collective bottom-up representation of what Katrina looked like. And a lot of the refugees were they gravitated towards that because they knew that what was being shown on the media was completely irrelevant to the experiences that they suffered through, whether a number of them were stranded on bridges during Katrina, and the experience of being stranded on bridges, being seen as potentially dangerous or hostile by police officers in New Orleans. I mean, it was a very compelling thing. So I think combining these three thoughts, I mean, that's I think is an interesting example of how people use technology not necessarily in terms of providing people with information, but helping provide people with the means of production to produce their own information. So that's a great point. Sir, I know you came in a little bit, but do you have you've heard this conversation, do you have any thoughts or comments you might like to add?
Sure. I've been working in social work also as an adjunct faculty in social work, and one of the requirements for a graduate degree in social work is that students perform internships in the community. So when you sort of lay that over students who are in graduate programs for information technology, that particular model is applicable in terms of working in communities. So I'm hearing a lot of what people are saying is that they want to connect to communities and want to connect to doing some of the things in these communities that are needed. So that's a good way to utilize people who are in those fields as far as information technology to go into communities, to do internships in communities as part of your graduate studies.
Great, yeah, and I think with the community informatics course at Illinois, Kate Williams has really been able to do that with some of the placements at some of the places around Champaign-Urbana. But we'd like, Adrian, maybe as a faculty member at Dominican, do you know if there's any of the field placements, either in social work or other places, are they starting to use any technology and field placements like that?
There's no emphasis on it, but of late, for those who are doing macro social work, like administrative social work, where they work in the communities, doing more, not direct practice with clients, but community organizing, working with community members, collaboration. Increasingly, they need technology, and so there is really a push for them to learn how to use these technology tools and to collaborate with librarians, to understand what these tools are. So in our school, we are starting to combine library and information science together with social work degrees. So we have a dual degree program for students who are interested. So
Great. So we've heard a lot of really great discussion, and we have our time is starting to wind down. So let's I wanted to shift the conversation a little bit based on a lot of these topics that we've thrown out. I wanted to get us thinking in a more focused fashion on what are some research topics or research projects that we think could come out of the topics we've discussed, so that we could forward these conversations in a more systematic fashion. So now, so I guess the agenda topic that I'm putting forward is what research do we think is needed to help us better think about and understand the issues that we've put forward. I'll just start out. I thought the idea of libraries teaching programming universally in 10 to 12 years was a quite captivating one, and that seems directly applicable to research. You could do some research based on what technology skills are people enter. What technology skills do people have when they enter library school? And what technology skills do they have when they leave library school? That seems like that would be a first order research topic. A second research topic would be some kind of survey 5 years after you finish the program. How are you using the skills that you acquired in your public service? What other? Let's just stick to that topic for just a minute, because I think it's really captivating. What other research topics can we think of that would help us understand that? Professor Arpalimwa?
Yeah, it seems to me that there are, to bookend the whole discussion, on the one hand, because this transformation is taking place, we're right at the beginning of this transformation, and so detailed diary accounts of what's happening in our specific environments, like a local branch library, detailing the day-to-day transformation of the staff, the tools, the community that comes in, the policies, because many of the things that we experience on a day-to-day basis sometimes we miss. But in retrospect, if you think of this as the Industrial Revolution, then that day-to-day transformation of the workplace is really important. And so that's on the one hand. We can all do that. And we can do that even when we go to work in a branch library. You know, the obvious statement is we're too busy to do any research. Simply detailing what your experience is and what your colleagues experience and what the conversation is at the water cooler and so on over time, that's going to be very important. On the other hand, the aggregated databases, such as has been pulled together by Berthaud, chronicling the trend in the emergence of computers and skill sets that are needed in the current library. So we've got those two extremes. One is the individual experience, and the other is the big data set that helps us see the individual experience in the big picture. If we keep those two things in mind as far as empirical information, then all of us can interrogate that data from whatever theoretical or policy question interests us. But the key question to me is what data is being collected and how can we make that data public so we can all have access to it.
Let's see, is there anyone have any comments about that? Maybe we have a number of people working in the library, so maybe the two people, Tom and Susan from Northwestern, what type of data are you collecting at your library?
We just started at the main library with an assessment program that was predicated by our restructuring of our entire public services. So we are still hammering out what data is already being collected and then how this person will be collating that, putting that into effect. But it's something that hasn't been made a priority, so I find it interesting. And I've noticed that I think University of Chicago just recently hired an assessment librarian, so somebody that is specifically going to be focusing on that. And again, in our situation, we not only have a specific person, but also a realigned, our new user experience department. And I think they are going to be addressing some of these types of topics as to what do we need to know before we start, as you say, interrogating the data. What data do we need to retrieve? So at this point, the person who's the assessment librarian has just been going around and doing one-on-one interviews with people and asking what is the daily workflow, how does this fit into the context, and actually we're going to have a meeting this coming Tuesday where he's going to update the whole public services division on what he's done so far. It's been about 5 or 6 months since he started, and what his vision and the administration's vision is for moving forward.
So I don't know if you guys know about Northwestern, but I went to the law school and we're linked, but at the same time totally separate from the main campus. Right now, not a whole lot is happening, only because we're still waiting for the director of our library, which it's been about a year. We also have a brand new dean, so a lot of bureaucracy when it comes to figuring out that kind of thing. We do also have a librarian who, I don't know her actual, do you know what Lewis's title is? No, yeah.
No.
So she, as I understand it, she has like one of the only positions that are like that in the country. She's a librarian, but she also works with IT. So I think at one point they were trying to kind of meld the two together a little bit more. I don't know that that's been entirely successful at the law school. But as far as like, you know, user, like what people need and things like that, I don't know that there's a lot being done. And if there is, I'm just like a low lady assistant, so we don't talk things like that, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's great. Unfortunately, we only have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that we hear all our panel respond to Abdul's point. So, Adrian, I know you struggled to find information about how social workers are using technology. So maybe you have a perspective on this topic from your perspective in social work on data.
On data, yeah, I'd like to find out how much, what kinds of skills social workers bring into the education, and perhaps with a collaboration with library information science, what kinds of skills do they learn moving forward? And the other piece I was thinking about is, you know, I see librarians as being more engaged with communities and becoming advocates of the community. So how does the library education prepare new students to engage in communities? Do you all feel prepared going as you graduate, whether you're able to engage with communities, and are you able to collect data from communities that will inform your practice as librarians? Yeah, that's.
So Holly, maybe is
To kind of go with that,
Yeah.
I really feel like I need to take a second language.
Yeah.
I think it's a little late, but I think I need to learn how to speak Spanish.
Mm-hmm. So maybe data source that we need are language competencies of practicing librarians. I'm not sure. I'm sure there's probably some survey out there, but that would be something that we would need to know.
We've talked about that a little bit in Kate's class, and the fact that our graduate school doesn't support that as part of the curriculum. Learning a second language. We can take courses outside, 12 hours outside, but it doesn't support a foreign language.
Maybe we could have introduction to programming in Spanish and kill two birds with one stone.
We spend so much time talking about diversity and working with underrepresented groups, and yet, I don't know how to speak Spanish.
So Kong is a bilingual individual. Maybe I'll let you make some comments close to the topic on data and maybe something on language as well.
As to the topics on data, I think that as the technology, the hardware develop very fast, the data size becomes larger and larger. That gives an important role to the librarian to help people organize those data and reuse those data. So I think the librarians, they can play an important role on helping people make the data more organized and make the data can be retrieved very easily, can be used by the people very easily. So I think the future role for the librarians is to help select which data we need to collect and organize and preserve for the future use, and to help the local community to establish their own data sets for their history and their cultural heritage and so on.
Great. So I'm just going to try to wrap up really briefly by summarizing some of the topical areas we've discussed today. Before I do that, we are hopefully going to be going out for dinner tonight. And hopefully, so if any students would like to join us to continue this conversation over dinner, please just meet in front in this area with the chairs, just where the posters are now. After the conclusion of the day today, we'll have to wrap up a few things, but as soon as we get technology wrapped up, then we can go out and have dinner together. So that would be a great way to continue this conversation. So some of the points that we've talked about today, we've talked about this issue of data collection, data access, in terms of monitoring ourselves and monitoring the field, making sure we stay up to date not only with what's happening in our immediate environment, but in the collective universe that we occupy. We've also talked about the changing educational environment and the way that we as students need to, and as future professionals, as academics, need to play a role in changing the current educational offerings, because we know that they're inadequate based on our changing society. We've also talked about stabilizing public service. We know that the corporations are going to make as many encroachments as they possibly can, including into our homes, our families, and our public libraries, and thinking about how we can stabilize public service in this environment. We've also talked about this question of culture and cultures that are not using technology at all, as well as the question of cultures and what do we need to work with diverse cultures in our different societies and nations. And related to that, the topic of language and being to know languages, both the languages that are something like English and Spanish, as well as the cultural languages, the cultural competencies, to be able to have dialogues with people of different ages and cultures and communities and life experiences. And so that's, I think that's, is there any final topics that I haven't addressed that people think I should add to my summary of this conversation. Well, if not, let's continue the conversation in about 3 hours. And I wanted to thank our impromptu panel. I think this was a really valuable